What would the world look like if we had no more addiction? What areas of life would be impacted? Crime, healthcare costs, family dynamics, and insurance costs are just a few areas that could see positive and beneficial results. The way to make maximum impact with any issue is to trace it to the root of its origin. What if adult addiction actually starts in childhood? Although there are certainly other factors to consider, many adults with addiction issues can trace the beginning of their drug use to childhood trauma or an event that they were unable to process. I'm going to share some of the statistics of addiction with you and then explore how we can make an impact on the addict's life before the addiction does. Let's start with a look at the numbers of addiction. The cost of substance abuse has to be viewed two ways, in financial terms and as an impact on society. According to a report written jointly by the Pew Charitable Foundation and the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation in 2015, the estimated yearly economic impact of illicit drug and alcohol abuse is a combined total of $442 billion. Prescription opioid overdose, abuse, and dependence adds another $78.5 billion. Then there is the human and social cost to consider. The Surgeon General reports that in 2014, nearly 30,000 people died due to overdose on heroin and or prescription opioids. And an additional 20,000 people died as a result of unintentional overdose of alcohol, cocaine, and non-opioid prescription drugs. These numbers do not reflect those that died from other issues that drug use contributed to. The National Institute of Justice reports that 60% of individuals arrested for various crimes test positive for illicit drugs at the time of their arrest. Then there are the children. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, an estimated 12% of children in this country live with a parent who has dependency or abuse issues with drugs or alcohol. And the National Survey of Child and Adolescent Well-Being reports that an estimated 61% of infants and 41% of older children in the foster care system are from families with active drug and alcohol abuse issues. Then we reach the drug use numbers among the children. In a study by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, lifetime alcohol use rose from 22.8% in 2016 to 23.1% in 2017 among 8th grade students. And it went from 61.2% up to 61.5% among 12th grade students. The use of illicit drugs went from 17.2% up to 18.2% in 8th graders, showing an ever upward trend that undoubtedly leads to more adults with addiction issues. And the cycle goes on through another generation. So now let's examine the connection between trauma and addiction. First, let's define trauma. Trauma is defined as a deeply disturbing or distressing experience or physical injury. Now, we all automatically have things that come to mind when we hear the word trauma, such as physical abuse, sexual assault, etc. But think about the 7-year-old that finds themselves dealing with the death of a grandparent. To an adult, this isn't accepted as part of life. But to a child with limited coping skills, it is a major trauma. Or the child that finds their parents in the middle of a bitter divorce. Again, by definition, a deeply distressing event to the child. If you start to see these events as what they are to the children, traumas, you can start to understand how they can often lead to addiction issues as they become adults, especially if they don't have help and guidance to process the events. The neurological connection between trauma and addiction is explained in an article by recovery.org called 7 Reasons Your Habit Makes Perfect Sense. The amygdala, which is your brain's threat detection center, can become overactive when you experience a trauma. It then engages in a cycle of constantly looking for, seeing, and assessing threats, leading a person to feel intensely anxious, vulnerable, and fearful. The hippocampus, which is your brain's center for processing memories, can become underactive. Then, rather than consolidating, reconciling, then placing memories in the outer layer of the brain for long-term storage, memories get stuck in a present time loop. And the result is you experience the intrusive, disturbing, and uncomfortable feelings and emotions over and over. And then your brain's center for executive control, the cortex, becomes interrupted by survival-oriented instincts from deep within the brain. These instincts overrule logical thinking, diminish cognitive processing, and decrease your ability to inhibit behavior. So even when you try to refrain from addictive behaviors, you experience the unstoppable urge to engage in it. Addiction often helps reduce the sensation of overwhelm and anxiety that the post-trauma changes in our brain create. We self-medicate with drugs and or alcohol to bring a feeling, even a temporary one, of calm. The first step is to look at the effects trauma has on our children and use a broader sense of trauma's meaning to those children. We don't hesitate to get our children medical attention for physical trauma, but we need to be just as fast to get them psychological help for what I call the lesser traumas. The family deaths, the divorces, the bullying that they endure, we must teach healthy coping skills, just like we teach reading, writing, and healthy eating habits. These skills are every bit as important to a growing child and growing children into healthy whole adults as teaching them to take care of their bodies. By starting to look at addiction not only as a disease that we treat, but also as a condition we can prevent, we could possibly begin to see a decrease in the number of people facing addiction. And by proxy, therefore, start to make an impact on the financial and societal burdens that addiction creates. We could start to see positive trending numbers when it comes to the use of drugs and alcohol amongst our youth in this nation. We could get to the root of addiction issues and change the landscape of our children's psychological well-being and possibly prevent some from future addiction issues.